My name is Robert Goodwin, and this is Law on the Line. I would like to introduce my guest for this segment, Matthew Teeter. And Matt is an attorney with the law firm of Roberts and Teeter, and they are located in Somerset County and on the border with New Brunswick. And Matt is a specialist in criminal law, both municipal court indictable offenses. He also handles domestic violence, restraining orders, the defense primarily, and contempt of domestic violence matters. Anyway, Matt, welcome aboard to Law on the Line.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And today is a topic of, I think, interest to a large swath of our audience, and we're going to talk about marijuana.
Yes.
And how that went from a forbidden drug, considered a drug, to something which is now legal in many states, although not legal with the federal government.
Right.
At any rate, so you're an expert in the area of marijuana, at least the law, and I'm not talking about use now, we're talking about the law. And I like to introduce the subject in that when did it become legal, and what is the act called? I think you said CREMA, so go ahead.
Sure. So as a criminal defense attorney, I probably get asked this quite a bit. In fact, some of the most frequently asked questions that I get through phone calls have to do with the legalization of marijuana. What can I do? Where can I buy it? What I can't do? And so to kind of give a little bit of a background, for years in the state of New Jersey, marijuana recreationally and even medically was illegal. We didn't have that. And then New Jersey introduced a medical program at first, and then in 2020, the voters of the state of New Jersey voted that they wanted to see marijuana legalized. And in February of 2021, our governor had actually passed the CREMA, or the CREAM Act, and that stands for, I'm going to get it, I promise you, it's long. It's the Cannabis Regulatory Enforcement Assistance Marketplace Modernization Act, CREMA, C-R-E-A-M-M-A.
Okay, and what does it modernize?
And well, the act basically it actually now controls the medical aspect of our laws in the state in regard to marijuana, but also the recreational, and outlines what type of licenses the state will issue and who's a vendor and who's not a vendor and what people can do recreationally and what they can't. I think there was this big misconception that when people found out marijuana would be legalized recreationally in the state, that they thought, oh, well, I can go out and smoke it wherever I want, and I can drive in my car and I can do what I want. It's not like that. And so really what CREMA does is it outlines the do's and don'ts, and it's constantly being reviewed, and there's new legislation that's always being introduced. For example, as of right now, you can't grow anything yourself, right? You can't grow any marijuana yourself, but there's some legislation that's come down the pipeline that's being introduced, potential legislation which would allow individuals to grow up to 6 plants individually, right?
So a person who wants to grow a marijuana plant, that's still or remains illegal in the state of New Jersey?
Correct, that's correct.
So if someone wants to read about CREMA, because we're not going to talk about all aspects of it, where would one find the act itself?
I would recommend that you visit the Cannabis Regulatory Commission for New Jersey, their website, and you can read about all different types of aspects. You can actually read the entire act if you like to read hundreds of pages. But that's the website. There's a lot of good references on the NJ Court's websites, and a lot of bloggers that talk about this type of stuff, because it's been an ongoing topic in our state long before it was legalized. It was a long battle, I felt, and now that it's here, everyone kind of wants to know, well, what can I do, what can't I do, and what does the law outline? So
briefly, prior to the law, the CREMA, it was illegal to have any quantity of marijuana in your possession.
Possess, sell, yep.
And oftentimes it was used as a means by which, or for a search of a motor vehicle. Oftentimes that was the pretext, if you will, for a stop, maybe a stop and frisk, search of a motor vehicle. Does any of that apply anymore, and to operators of motor vehicles or anybody? How comfortable should a person feel now with CREMA in effect?
Well, what I tell people is that you can possess it in your motor vehicle, right? You could possess it in your home.
Up to how much?
So any person who's who's 21 years of age or older in the state of New Jersey, even if you're not from New Jersey, if you have a relative coming to the state, as long as they're 21 or older, they can purchase from a licensed facility within the state. If it's for recreational purposes, you can purchase up to 1 ounce per person. If you try to purchase more than that, they're not going to let you. If you have a medical card, you can purchase up to 3 ounces, I believe, within a 30-day period.
And how many ounces can a person purchase within for personal or recreational purposes? 1 ounce at a time?
1 ounce at a time.
Are there any limitations on the amount of times
I
you
haven't
can go
run
to a
into
dispensary?
that. I haven't seen that, but I haven't had someone that goes every single day that purchases it. A client that I talk to that says that, but I've had clients that have said, "Listen, I went in and I purchased a bulk amount of stuff," and they said, "Well, you got to put this, this, and this back because you're beyond the ounce."
I see.
So they do follow the state facilities do follow the regulations pretty closely. But kind of what ties into that is, you can go to a liquor store and you can purchase alcohol, right? Alcohol is legal. You're 21 and older, you can consume it, but you can't drive around with an open container in your vehicle.
Correct.
You can't drive around under the influence to the point where it impairs your ability to operate a motor vehicle safely. Same thing with marijuana. I always tell clients, if you're going to drive with it, make sure it's locked in your trunk, okay? Because if it is out in the open, is it enough for them to search your entire vehicle? Probably no. I mean, they're going to smell marijuana. They just want to make sure you're not under the influence while you're driving. And if they see it and you have it out in the open in the cabin, you're likely going to receive an open container violation or ticket, just as if you had an open beer sitting in the cup holder. So if you want to transport it, you need to have it in the trunk of your car.
Is that all under CREMA?
Yeah,
Okay,
all these regulations are outlined. And you're still subject to the DWI penalties, which we'll get to a little bit later. But yeah, you can't just get in your car after you smoke and you're high and you think you're going to drive a car and not be subjected to penalties, because you would be.
Now, let's, for example, I go to a dispensary, I buy up to 1 ounce of marijuana. Am I able to share that with anybody? Am I able to sell it? You know, and make it into smaller bags or baggies.
So you can gift up to 1 ounce of marijuana to another individual who's 21 years or older, and you cannot receive any form of compensation or payment for it. So if you have someone that's got a big birthday coming up and you want to gift them 1 ounce of marijuana, you can very well do that. As I stated earlier, if you have a relative, a friend, somebody from out of state coming to visit, they don't have to be a New Jersey resident as long as they have a license and ID showing they're 21 and older. Mm-hmm. Another common question I do get is, can I travel with it? And the answer is no. Not by train, not by plane, not by automobile. You can't bring it over state lines. Oh. You can't mail it over state lines either, and that includes mailing it to a state or transporting it to a state where it's also legal in that state. So you take a state like Nevada and a state like New Jersey. Marijuana is legal recreationally in both states. You can't mail it from New Jersey and then mail it to Nevada, even though both states have legalized it. You can't do that.
Is that because of CREMA, or is that because of federal law that doesn't recognize the law?
It's outlined in CREMA, but I will touch on the federal law in a moment, but which leads me to the next question, which is people say, where can I smoke it? Where can I consume it, right? So you can consume on private property, but private property owners have the right to reserve it as a no smoking section area. You're noticing a lot of towns are passing ordinances that they don't want dispensaries in their towns. So the towns really will control what they'll allow and what they won't. But you can't, you can smoke it in public places as long as it's a non-smoking, there's no non-smoking signs, but federal property, you can't. And in New Jersey, that means, to me, at least when I get phone calls, it's Sandy Hook Beach. It's a common area. Right. People want to go out there, they'll smoke a joint or whatever on the beach. It's federal property. It's still illegal federally. So you will be cited for that there. But almost any other area, it's pretty common. I mean, you can walk down the street, people will be smoking it on the sidewalk. I mean, if as long as the area permits smoking and it's in a public area, then you can. And there are actually some indoor places that have licenses where consumption can be on site.
Is that a special license they
Dispensaries, yeah, they'll have a smoking room or something like that where it's indoors, but you have to have that license in order to do that. So there's a couple different options, but the main idea behind it is stay off federal property and make sure you know where your surroundings are, you know what your surroundings are and where you are, because if it's a non-smoking area or section, most New Jersey beaches are non-smoking, so you can still be cited for that by the township that you're in.
And cited for smoking or having marijuana in your possession?
It's going to be smoking. I mean, there's nothing that says that you can't have it in your possession as long as you're 21 and older. That's the big key, because if you notice in a lot of these beach towns, it's kids under 21. Correct. So, you know, it's no different. They try to regulate it almost like alcohol.
and then they're charged with underage possession, similar to underage possession of alcohol.
And they're subject to the penalties that come associated with that. It's a lot of young offenders I see with it, but I've noticed that most police departments are somewhat laxed with it. So they're somewhat relaxed. They're not going to prosecute as much on these types of cases because, quite frankly, they're nonviolent offenses, and we have so much more to deal with in the state of New Jersey. So I think it's been wonderful for the state. I know that the law is going to constantly keep changing like every law, and who knows, maybe one day people will be able to grow their own, but for now, it's all regulated by the state. They want their money. They want a lot of this to go to the taxes for the state and help the state out with a lot of good causes and programs. But there's a lot of gray area still, I think, to be worked out.
So tell me a little bit more about dispensaries. I think that many people consisting of our listening audience have not gone into a dispensary. How are they regulated, and what is it like to go into a dispensary?
So most dispensaries could either be classified as purely medicinal. So if you don't have a medical card, you're not entitled to go in there, and you're not registered in their system, you can't go. And then some are both. So they're medicinal and recreational. And a lot of the ones that I've seen, they'll reserve hours in the morning only for medical patients. So maybe from 8 o'clock to 10 a.m., and I'm just using this as an example, only for medicinal patients, and then at 10 a.m. it becomes open to the public for recreational purchases. The reason why is I think that with medical patients come in, they don't want to have to deal with long lines and large crowds of people. And a lot of them are cancer patients, people with Crohn's disease, very serious things that cause pain. And so they will reserve those hours, so to say. But when you go in, typically, they're going to ask for your license for recreational. They're going to make sure you're 21 and older. If your license is expired, they're not going to let you in. It's got to be a valid license. Once they scan it, they tell you can go into probably the main area, the main room. And when you open the door, I would say it's probably no different than like an Apple iTunes store. It's very laid out, very open floor. Usually there's a lot of glass cases, plenty of people willing to help that are knowledgeable, and kind of, if you've never been in one or you've never consumed and you were thinking about it, well, will this help me sleep, or what will this do? So it's very open, and there's obviously different types of product, from edibles to actual flower product to oils, topicals that you can rub on your skin. So it just really depends on the dispensary, what they offer, and what the client's looking for.
Are there any particular qualifications for the persons who work at these dispensaries, the salespeople? Are there
I don't know about this. The salespeople have to be licensed through the commission, through the regulatory commission. So if you go into a dispensary, you would see the employee wearing a lanyard around their neck, and what you see around their neck is their picture ID and their license, so to say, to work in one of these facilities. As far as the ownership, I'm not sure, but I know that they jump through hoops to get the permits. I mean, some towns are only offering, say, 3 permits for this type of business. So if you're able to secure that with that permit, that gives you the right to open it and sell it on a regular basis to not only medical patients but also recreationally.
And does, when you would think that buying from a dispensary controls the product, as opposed to people buying, on the street as it had been. Where does the marijuana come from, and how is it chemically tested to see that it's not impure with adulterants or anything like that?
Almost any time you make a purchase, you can read the label on the packaging. I know that there's a couple farms in Boonton, New Jersey that have some contracts with some of the dispensaries. Some of it a lot of it's grown here in state. It just depends. But if you read the back, it will actually give you the breakdown of what percentage of THC may be in the product. And they may tell you, well, if you have a high tolerance, you may want to go with this. So really just ask the individual who's working there if you're unsure, because they're knowledgeable and they know what products they have. But you should always read the back label if you're unsure. And if you don't know what those letters are or what this means or that means, ask about it. Because they're more than willing to show you and help you before you decide what type of purchase you want to make.
Interesting.
And don't smoke it before you get in your car, all right? Because then you got to deal with the DWI laws in New Jersey.
Yeah, that's true. A few points. You can only buy up to an ounce at a time.
Correct.
And can an out-of-state guest, for example, purchase
Yes.
marijuana in New Jersey?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep,
so
we-
you don't need to
we
be
touched
a
on that.
resident.
Yep. Nope.
What if you don't have a license, you just have a state ID card?
That's a good question.
A lot of people
I would
don't
think
have
if it's a
licenses.
state a passport, something like it's got to be something official that
State-issued identification
yeah, I mean,
card?
because they're going to scan it, so that's it. I mean, it was I had a client the other day who told me his license was expired, but they had told him if you just go online to the New Jersey website and you renew it right now online, they'll just have a barcode, they'll just scan it, and it'll tell them that your license is now up to date because you paid it online.
Do you need to be a citizen to purchase marijuana in the state of New Jersey?
21 and older.
Period.
That's it.
But if you don't have an ID?
I don't know how you'd get in the dispensary.
Right,
You
okay.
know, that's kind of one of the
And what if you have an
requirements.
ID from your country of origin?
I think as long as it's a legitimate ID, if you're talking about a license from Mexico, something like that.
Correct.
But generally, I think the dispensaries are very strict on that. I don't want to speak on that because specifically just because I don't know for sure, to tell you
Right.
the truth. But I know that they're very specific because if they violate any regulations, they could be shut down. Obviously, they could lose their license.
And that must be an expensive license to obtain.
I'm sure it is. Yeah, they're very limited as well. So, but another common question I get asked is, well, am I still subject to the DWI penalties if I'm under the influence while I'm in the car? And the answer to that
Are
is
you?
yes, of course.
Okay.
If you get pulled over, an officer comes up and he doesn't have to smell burnt marijuana. Maybe he sees your eyes are low, red, and listen, that could be you're tired. It could be many things. But if they ask for you to come out of the vehicle, maybe they're asking, did you consume? You say, yeah, I did 2 hours ago. Or they find something in the car that makes them believe that maybe you may be under the influence. They're going to put you under a series of tests that really test your motor skills, your cognitive abilities. And if they believe that you're under the influence and they use a drug recognition expert or they use a series of tests that they use that would give them a pretty clear indication as to whether or not you're under the influence, you are subject to the laws of New Jersey's DWI laws. And if you're convicted, it's a 7 to 12-month loss of license.
And do they have tiers of offenses? For example, a DUI, it's a first offense, second offense. Is that similar? With,
yeah, I mean, as if you have a drug DWI, the penalties are different than an alcohol DWI, right? Because the laws have changed in our state on December 1st of 2019 in regard to alcohol-related DWIs. They'll now let you install an interlock device in the vehicle, right? And during the suspension period, they don't allow that in drug DWIs, right? Because what would that prevent? It's only to determine whether or not you're drinking. So if your DWI is based on drugs, it's going to be based on a 7 to 12-month loss of license. On a second offense, it goes up. It's between
2 years.
Yeah, of course.
So tell me about the drug recognition experts. In other words, person has a few tokes, I guess it's called, and ostensibly they're high. Officer believes they're high. Their psychomotor skills are somewhat affected. What does the officer are officers trained to recognize the effects of marijuana being under the influence? Are they drug recognition officers, or is that a special breed of officers?
So not every officer that's trained is a certified drug recognition expert. It's a certification they have to obtain. Sometimes I'll deal with a case where the individual is pulled over and the officer that pulled them over will call another officer to the scene who is a DRE, and they put them under a series of tests that are similar to the tests that they would have you do if they thought you were under the influence of alcohol, just slightly different. And at the end, they make a determination. And in those cases, it's pretty much warrants to get blood or urine because that's the only way to determine what's in the system, right? I mean, and I've had cases where they actually thought that the client was under the influence of marijuana or alcohol, and the client went to the station and took the breathalyzer and had no alcohol and voluntarily gave their urine, and there was nothing in their urine. So they were just tired. Maybe they were swerving that night. They got off late. Their eyes were low and red. The officer thought maybe they were under the influence. So I always tell people, be careful. Don't consume it in your car whatsoever, even if you're just sitting outside of your house or whatnot. Consume it in the confinement of your own home, on your back deck, something like that. But be very careful with getting behind the wheel, because obviously it does have an effect on you as a driver.
So with alcohol, we have an alcohol test. We have, and people are familiar with that. And also, I guess, if a person refuses, we have refusal laws. Is there any such thing as a refusal to have a urine test and/or a blood test if an officer believes that you're under the influence of marijuana?
Well, if it's a blood test, it's going to be it's going to be on a warrant.
On a warrant.
I can promise
People
you that
need to
the
know that.
hospital will take it. The hospital will then pass it off. There'll be a chain of custody, which is, as you know, as a prosecutor, sometimes difficult to prosecute these things when it comes to chain of custody.
True.
Was the blood stored properly? Was it obtained properly? Was there something that was done improper that could have thrown off the blood results? But generally, it's going to be a blood draw. Can you refuse to give urine? Yes, you could. But if they have a warrant for your blood, I can promise you one way or the other they're going to get it if there's a warrant for it. So, and sometimes what that can reveal is other things in your system.
True.
So the police may suspect it may be marijuana, and they get the blood results back, and it's levels of THC marijuana, it's Xanax, it's other things in there. So,
And they're more serious in terms of the
of course, and
offense that
mixed
arises.
with marijuana could provide a disastrous effect on the driver, slow up their reaction time, maybe they don't stop in time. So it's a common question I get all the time is like, can I get a DWI by consuming marijuana? Yes, you can. Okay, so this isn't a free rein to do whatever you want, smoke whatever you want, get behind the wheel. We obviously want to keep our roadways safe. Just like as an individual who's over 21, you can go to a bar, have 2 or 3 beers, but within a certain amount of time. But if you're going to drink more than that, you need to be aware that you're subject to the laws, and if you're over a 0.08 blood alcohol content, you're going to be cited. So,
But there's no real level, like we know 0.08 is a limit. Is there such a level for THC in the blood system, or?
It's tough because a lot of times it's metabolized and the body metabolizes it. But yeah, usually there's levels that you can determine if there's either sky high or they're not.
Who does that? The drug recognition officer is able to determine that and read the blood test?
The blood draw will come back from the hospital and there'll be results, and the prosecutor will look at it, and they generally have an idea. As far as how that works, it's complicated, but it's one of these things where they're going to use different techniques, so to say, to pinpoint what it is. I can tell you that blood is more accurate than almost anything else. So you have these alcohol test machines that people blow into to determine what their blood alcohol is, not nearly as accurate as a blood draw. I mean, the blood draw, when they get it back, it's going to tell you that it's 99.8 or 99.9% accurate in probability based on the blood results. So sometimes you get a DWI where somebody has marijuana in their system and they have alcohol. And then it's really up to the prosecutor on what they want to pursue. Do they want to pursue this as an alcohol DWI? Do they want to pursue it as a drug DWI?
It would seem to me, as a former prosecutor, that a DWI with alcohol, you have something that's ascertainable, an actual test that gives you an actual reading. There are no actual readings, though, with THC.
There's not. There has been talk about people kind of speculating, is there some sort of machine we can come up with that you blow into and it could detect how long ago you smoked? I just don't think that that's going to happen. I think that the right minds are thinking of ways to resolve this, but there's no study that says, okay, well, if you consume, you should wait 6 hours before you operate a motor vehicle. Or if you consume, you should wait 4 hours. Why? Because every person's different, and every person has different body weight and different tolerances, just like with alcohol. I'm a big guy. I could drink 4 or 5 beers, and it'll have a different effect on me than it will my wife, who's half my size and body weight. Same thing with marijuana. If you have a higher tolerance, it's going to affect you less than somebody who's maybe never consumed before. Now they are consuming marijuana for the first time or smoking it, and they're getting behind the wheel, and it's a disaster. They don't know what to do, and they're just not used to how their body feels on it.
But it would be the DRE that would have to say, the drug recognition officer expert, who would have to testify that that person is under the influence. Am I correct?
They would say they believe that they were under the influence of a narcotic. It may not necessarily know it's marijuana until the blood comes back, but there are multiple narcotics that have a similar effect to the marijuana on the body. So things that kind of slow down your system a little bit, your reaction time. And so it's kind of, as I stated, still a gray area. There's still a lot of litigation going on whether or not DREs should be accepted or not, whether or not an officer needs specific training or not. And that's a whole other conversation that I won't even dive into today.
But right now, what is the status of prosecution? If somebody is driving a motor vehicle, a police officer is a trained expert. This particular officer is a DRE. He says this person is under the influence. He issues a violation under Title 39450, am I correct?
I have a couple right now in my office that are purely marijuana DWIs.
How does the state go about proving that then?
Well, the state's going to rely on the blood results that show that there's a level of THC in their system.
So there has to be blood?
I believe so. I don't know any other way that you can kind of prove it unless you have an admission from the driver, right? You might have a driver who says, yeah, I smoked 30 minutes ago. Okay.
Okay, that's true.
But there's usually a lot of other circumstantial evidence, right? And they have to have failed these specific tests that they give you, and an officer will testify to his observations, which I think is probably the most important part of the case. What did their eyes look like? What was their demeanor like? Were their hand movements kind of slow? Did they answer your questions directly? Then there's a different series of tests. One of the tests that they have individuals do, the officers, and they don't do this for alcohol-related DWIs, is they actually have you tilt your head back, close your eyes, put an arm out to your side, and touch your nose 6 times like this. And they actually have a chart with a face on it, and they will indicate where the person's actually touching. And if it's not your nose, but it's close to it, you're failing that test.
What if you don't have blood, though? Are you able to still establish a case for being under
It's
the
very tough.
influence?
I would say it's tough.
I see.
You could, but I think it would be extremely tough because, like I said, I've had cases where they've mistaken people that were just tired for being under the influence. So it can go either way.
So, Matt, let's segue over to the workplace.
Right.
What rights does an employee have, or I should maybe conversely, what rights does an employer have in terms of regulating employees that may have consumed marijuana?
Well, they're able to do that. So that's why the answer is really it depends on who you work for and who your employer is, because they absolutely have the right to drug test if they feel that it compromises the safety. I know, if you work in specific, like if you work on the railroad, let's say, and you go on vacation, when you come back within 24 hours, they're going to drug test you because you're operating heavy machinery and trains with lots of people. So if you're a train conductor, I happen to have a client that's a train conductor, and he says that they always test. So they have the right to do that. And
What about a police officer?
Police officers now, if they're off duty, I believe they can consume. But again, it's just going to matter about, are you using while you're on the job? If you're on your off time, nobody cares what you're doing as long as it's legal. And now in New Jersey it is. So it really depends is the answer to that question.
So, for example, I'm a driver for Federal Express. I may be able to smoke marijuana on my own time, but I better make sure that when I come to work, I am free of any residual effects of marijuana. Am I correct?
I would say that's accurate, yeah.
And if I go on vacation, do they automatically test, or that depends upon the company?
It depends upon the company, but the issue with marijuana is that the marijuana can stay in your system for 30 to 40 days. So there's really it's very difficult to determine when did somebody consume. I mean, that's why the levels are important. But if I smoked 30 days ago, I still may fail that drug test for marijuana. So you really have to check your employment law, your employment contract is what I would say.
And that could be an absolute nix on, or negates the perhaps the personal right to smoke marijuana.
Right.
If your employer says, well, you have a trace in your system, we believe you're under the influence.
Correct. It all depends on the employer. There's nothing there's no law that regulates what they can and can't do in regard to that. But it's different recreationally than it is medically. I mean, if you're prescribed it's
a different ballgame.
Different.
Well, Matt, I got the signal that we have to wrap up. It was, again, a very, very, for me, a very enlightening discussion, and I hope you enjoyed being on Law on the Line.
I always enjoy being on Law on the Line, and I appreciate you inviting me.
My pleasure,
I can't
Matt.
wait to come back sometime. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.